I think the big question on everyone's mind after watching Film Z is, does it top Strong World as a movie and overall just greatness? I watch Film Z now with subtitles. As some of you may know, I did a raw discussion after it leaked out a few months back, and the subtitles made it even 10 billion times better, high quality, everything was just freaking flawless. Let's talk about the animation, I guess, first of all. They had a couple of different little CG sequences where the camera just looked incredible. It blended in very well because CG can look bad sometimes. Like, there's some movies that when CG is added, it can look really terrible. But it really meshed well. It didn't look noticeable at all. For the most part, they did a great job with the CG. And overall, the animation was really top-notch. They put a lot into it. And that just goes to show hard work pays off, because this is one of the most top-selling movies in Japan for the year. Film Z, you know. So the animation, top of the line, 5 out of 5, just phenomenal. Beautiful. Some of the sequences just look freaking gorgeous. Like, you know, the fight scenes in general, they just looked phenomenal. So animation, we got it there. Now, as far as the story goes, as far as, you know, with Z and everything, if you've seen the movie, you know what it is. But basically, this guy, Z, he was an admiral at one point, and after, you know, certain events, he kind of fell off and went into a life of, I guess, crime, so to speak, so that, you know, he just wants to get his revenge. Now, with Z, in my opinion, the standout of this movie, even with all the great things that happen with all the different characters around, Z is who stands out the most to me, and Z is what makes the theme of this movie live and real. And that's what I guess the big important thing about this movie for me personally was, and that was the theme. And basically what I'm saying is perception is one of the big things about this movie. And it goes back to the little scenes where you see with the little kid that he's imitating. He's like, I don't know if I want to be a pirate or a marine when I grow up. And, you know, they're confused little there. But the ending sequence, which I don't want to spoil it away, but it kind of really just pushes forward even more. That theme of this is perception. I thought it was really just beautiful and a crazily well done message of ultimately you can be whatever you want to be. And, you know, sometimes there's always that gray line, and I love it when stories, especially One Piece, always brings this in. There's always that gray line where it's just good or bad, because at the end of the day, the Straw Hats are pirates, but they're doing good deeds along the way. They're not like the typical pirates. And when the little kid is really just imitating them, it really just, for me, was one of the most important things out of everything, the message of this movie, perception. So I really felt as though, like, over everything, and this is, again, with One Piece, over everything, there's always a really big theme that really drives it through. And that really made the movie special for me. I really enjoyed it. Now, as far as Z as a character, I felt as though his backstory was one of those heart-wrenching, really well-done things. I'm sure Oda worked on this, because it just felt like an Oda work. And, you know, just seeing everything he went through, it really raised the question, who the hell was it that ruined Z's life? Because we know, first of all, it was some pirate that was pissed off at him that killed his family. But then we find out that it was a pirate, a warlord, that actually killed all his peoples, all his comrades on his ship, and then, you know, he was ultimately promoted to warlord. He was, you know, just a regular pirate at that given time, and that's what made him go loose. It really begs the question who it is. Now, from what we know in the New World thus far, I don't believe it's anybody that we've seen. I think in the current manga, without giving any spoilers, it's still being a hidden secret who that was that ruined Z's life. But ultimately, that just raised even more questions as far as canon-wise, and ultimately just drove the story, because Z's past is one of the greatest things about this movie. It's just really sad, and it really makes you look at it like, god damn, you know, he went through a freaking lot. And me personally, on a personal level, I understand Z's hatred and his anger and why he did what he did. I really can sympathize with it. I mean, getting innocent people involved is never the right thing to do, but I understand he felt like everything was taken away from him. Even his arm was taken away from him, and he wanted to start taking back. He went from living a life of justice to ultimately living like what he actually hated, and that was a pirate, doing whatever he wanted to do. So once again, that just ultimately makes perception, because he had this perception that pirates were just evil because of everything that's happened to him. But then he started living like one. So you can really never point a finger, and you can never ultimately judge anything, because at the end of the day, you can be doing the same thing and not even realize it. And I guess this message was just really strong for me. Now, as far as the way the characters were in this movie, hilarious stuff. I felt as though transforming Nami and Chopper into little chibis, you know, when Aang used her powers on them, that was brilliant, because it added a little twist to the movie, not having every character exactly the way they normally are. are, and then also adding in the little comedy with Brooke as far as like him losing 12 years, it doesn't really matter. I think that they should have stressed a little bit more on that, because that would have been interesting. Like if somebody like Brooke, let's just say, if I was Brooke, I would be like obsessed with having that woman use her powers on me so that I can get back to how I used to look. Because if she would just use her power like, you know, a few times on him, then he would ultimately get his skin back. So I wish they would have pushed that a little bit more with Brooke, and, you know, they couldn't even work that into canon. But at the end of the day, him being who he is, you know, his skeleton form does make him who he is, branding-wise, and ultimately in the series. But it still would have been an interesting thing if it would have took a little more serious tone with Brooke and made him feel like, damn, you know what, I can actually be alive again in a way. Let me try to go after this. So that was a little interesting thing I thought of there. And as far as the rest of the characters, Zoro, typical badassness, Sanji, typical badassness, and there was a lot of good stuff with the characters, but I felt as though really the meat of the story lied with the Marines, and this was one time where I felt as though, yeah, the Straw Hats were there, but they were along for the ride, and this was more so an internal thing with the Marines and Aokiji and, you know, his take on it. I felt really bad for him having to see, you know, his former mentor, his former, you know, sensei ultimately end up like that. You know, he felt bad for it when he went at the end at the grave with the beer. You know, you can really feel it that he was feeling it too. He's a man at the end of the day, and he didn't want to shed a tear. He felt as though shedding a tear would be dishonoring his master, his former mentor's life. And I really respected that. I felt as though Kizaru, I guess it was worked in a way that it made sense, but he really didn't have too much compassion for the situation, because while he was just there blazing up, you know, he was doing his job, don't get me wrong, blazing up Z with all these lightning bolts and everything, the people around him, some of them were actually crying, and he was just there, like, you know, with his typical sarcasmness. So I felt as though it was pushed correctly, because it did say they never really got along too well, but ultimately I wish he would have showed a little more compassion. You know, Aokiji, you can tell he was broken up about it. That's why he didn't even want to attack him the first time he saw him. He just felt like, you know, this is my mentor, I don't even want to do this. So, you know, I can really sympathize with Aokiji. And ultimately the situation, for me personally, this movie was more about the Marines and more about Aokiji and Z than the Straw Hats. They were along for the ride, and ultimately Luffy even says he didn't care about any of this. It's just, dude, you destroyed my ship and you took my hat. I don't care about any of that. You want to destroy the seas? Go for it. Give me my hat back. So ultimately they took a back burner in this one, I felt, and the importance and the meat of it all was with the Marines, and that's amazing to make the main cast mostly just along for the ride for something even bigger than even them. And when it ultimately felt like they were going up against Z and the government, you knew shit was going down. So the plot of the story, very solid. There was a couple of little loose ends where I felt as though maybe it's just me misinterpreting things. Like, first of all, with Garp's position, I believe he's still with the Marines, but he ultimately just trains now. But him being Vice Admiral, I'm not exactly sure if that's what he is at the moment, or did he just completely remove the title in canon-wise, and he's still just along, like, you know, training people. So that was something I had into question. And also the fact that when they were in the water, in the hot springs, and they were kind of like getting weak, Luffy and Brooke, if I'm not mistaken, it should just be seawater that gets them weak. So I was a little confused as that as well, because if it was just regular water, then why were they getting, you know, weak and everything? So there was a couple little things here and there that probably, you know, are explained very well if you like just really dig into the story. But for the most part, I didn't find anything wrong with this movie. I felt as though, for the most part, it really just did what it set out to do, and that was tell the story of Z and something that happened in the Marines, something very personal, along with, you know, just having the main cast along for the ride. Let me know what you think, guys, though. First of all, does this movie surpass Strong World? In my opinion, it blows Strong World out the water. You have a larger-than-life story with so many different aspects. You bring in so many new things in it, and ultimately, it felt better. It felt more enjoyable, and it just felt like a great collage. Like, Luffy versus Z at the end of this movie, I felt it was a lot better than the final fight in Strong World, because Luffy versus Z, it made kind of sense that he could go up against him. You know, he was old, Z was old, weak, you know, he had to use the machine, his arm, so, you know, it made more sense, I felt, as though, opposed to the fight in Strong World. It was kind of a little bit, sometimes you could put into question, like, how did Luffy beat him? So, ultimately, it made sense, and everything about the movie just really was enjoyable and very well written. You know, they even left a couple of vague things, which I thought was a good point, because, you know, you don't want to mess with canon too much, like when Aokiji didn't really want to go into depth. Like, personally, as a fan, I was pissed off. Like, yo, talk more about your fight. But it made more sense to not mess with canon too much, and that was more of a safe bet in my opinion. So yeah, ultimately, I felt as though Film Z surpassed Strong World, and it was an awesome movie. And also, the big question is, who was it, the warlord, that ruined Z's life? That is the big question, because that's going to be worked into the story soon. And once we find out who this is, it's going to be very big, because, you know, it's tying into Z's life, ruining an admiral's life, and his strength is just going to be out this world if he was able to kick Z along with his entire crew's ass. So yeah, that's all I have for this review. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thumbs up for Film Z. I give this movie a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, because besides small nitpicks, which I think are bullshit to put in a review if you're nitpicking the shit out of it, it was a very well done movie, very well written, very well animated. Music, they didn't really have Avril Lavigne outside of, you know, just in the credits and stuff like that, so it didn't really, you know, mess with the flow of everything. And it was ultimately a very good movie, very well written, but at the end of the day, it is for One Piece fans only. If you don't watch One Piece or read One Piece, you will not understand a lot of things that are going on, so I will tell you that. Be warned, this can be very spoilerific if you don't read or watch One Piece. Yeah, I'm ForneverWorld, and as always, people, have an awesome day.